Thank you, Salvatore, and I apologize to all of you that the fact that we tend to agree may not make the discussion more lively. In fact, when you have the heads together, sometimes it sounds a little bit like a self-help group, where we share our problems and look for common solutions rather than that we have such different views. And if you have read recent publications and listened here today to Andreas, to Bruno, to others, to the Vice President, to Alexander, you see that whether you look at the Commission or at the national authorities, there is broad consensus on what the agenda for possible change could be. There might be some divergences still on what exactly we would then like to see in the new rules, but at least on the agenda we agree. And I think it also is a kind of a common denominator in what you have heard, that in the next development of the European cooperation, the focus will be more on the relations between the national competition authorities, while Regulation 1/2003 was focusing essentially on the relations between the Commission and the national authorities. And it is, I think, proof of the success of the network that in the network we have also found what we can do together and the extreme use of what we can do. Some of the issues. Fining, yes indeed, there we do need to seek further convergence. You will soon read in Concorrenza the reports on a very interesting debate organized by our Luxembourg colleagues in respect of fining, and Bruno chairs a to us, very important work group in the ECN, of which we expect a lot. But we need to seek a balance between the efficient use of resources and being able to allocate cases to each other, on the one hand, but also the effective enforcement, which means avoiding under-enforcement by having under-sanctioning, but also over-enforcement, looking at the nebis in idem. And one of, or some of the issues we may then need to tackle is the turnover on which we base the calculation of a fine. Because if we are not all the authorities of the affected markets are dealing with it, it is important that the one that does it can take into account turnover not only on the domestic market, but on the European or worldwide market. But at the same time, in case several do it, and there may occasionally be good reasons for several to do it, there may be a problem if they then each look at the European or worldwide turnover. That's a balance we have to seek, and there I think we need the power at this, either to look at a broader turnover, we cannot under our present legislation, but also an obligation of restraint in case several do it, and there are no rules on that either. We may need a common approach to ability to pay. I think it's one of the great merits of the present Commission that they address that issue as the first, and at the member state level, and certainly if several of us deal, we may have to look at the same. Vice President has referred to the issue of parent liability. There are indeed others. And then with regard to sanctions, convergence will inevitably become much more difficult if more of us have criminal sanctions and criminal procedures. And certainly, just imagine what happened when several of us have jail sentences. Will they then serve the successive sentence in the jails of the different jurisdictions? When you can almost make a movie on it. We will need to tackle that. There is also the need for enhanced information between us, the national authorities, on cases which we each genuinely think to be domestic. If you have seen what we have learned from neighbors' meetings in the area, geographic area of which where our Dutch colleagues, they took the first initiative, and as each year organize a neighbors meeting, but I know that the Scandinavians were probably the first to do it. In Central Europe, there is a cluster of neighbors who do it. Learning from each other on domestic cases gives you leads that, at least in our case, have now become the second most important source of cartel cases after leniency applications. That's not nothing, because we all seek to become less dependent on leniency only. But some of the authorities, some of our neighbors, are fairly free to exchange information. For us, we are totally free, even on leniency applications, to share it within the network. Others do not have that legal ability to do it. It would be very useful if there would be some convergence there. Powers. I was very glad, Bruno, that you discussed interim relief. We are, I guess, all under strong pressures to conclude our cases in a shorter period of time. But if we want to do a good job, if we, with due attention to due process and the rights of the defendants, it will always take longer than our stakeholders are willing to accept. To bring forward the useful effect of our actions is therefore extremely important, and interim relief is certainly one of them. But to have the best pitch for the standard of evidence is not easy. Because if the level is too high, you may not have interim measures. Or the pre-instruction of an interim measures case may also start taking too much time. But on the other hand, if it is very low, it becomes less meaningful. For instance, in our case, this present standard, I wonder what the courts may change about it, but the present standard is that it should not be unreasonable to think that there might be an infringement. That's a very low standard with regard to the prima facie. So the emphasis is then entirely on the risk of damage and the urgent need to repair it. And our legal systems with regard to interim relief are very different if you look at the German system, the Dutch system, the more Latin systems. So some convergence may also be useful there, and very difficult to achieve because you really go into your judicial systems. But I cannot emphasize enough, I think, the use and probably the need to bring forward the useful effect. Useful effect is not only about interim relief. A tricky issue is communication. When do you go to the press? Like many authorities, we only go to the press when there is a statement of objections. We're criticized for that, but we have not yet been criticized in court. We think, for instance, that going to the press when you open a case is not justified. And some of us have proceedings going against them or had proceedings going against them, and I understand that even in one case there were damages. To have a kind of common understanding on how you do it and what you are expect to do in order to be in line with the effective enforcement principle might be helpful. Standard of evidence. What are not best practices, but acceptable practices with regard to ICT forensic, for instance, in dawn raids, would be extremely useful. Because the courts, in the absence of guidance, binding rules, President Zano would, of course, convince them more than soft law. But there isn't even soft law. And probably we have to go through a soft law phase before we feel ready to advise on hard law. That would make the task of our review judges much, much easier, and that would then definitely, I think, benefit to the effectiveness of the enforcement by our respective authorities. And this is likely to become much, it is already important, I think, but it's likely to become more important if you see what is going on in a number of industries. The degree of concentration goes up. And it is not just a degree of concentrations by mergers, it is also an increased degree of interrelation in supply chains by all kinds of subcontracting and joint component manufacturing and other arrangements. Now, prohibiting these kinds of arrangements may not be the best solution. It may even make markets work less good instead of better. But the correlation is that we should become even better or better to deal with collusion, as the risk of collusion, I think, is certainly going up, and to proceed in case of collusion would definitely be more effective if we had common standards on evidence. Two final comments. Yes, I think it would be useful to abolish the distinction between the network under Regulation 1/2003 and the cooperation with regard to merger control. And with regard to merger control, certainly we should avoid the kind of incidents Bruno has referred to, but there haven't been many, and we should also say that. And in concurrence, again, this is not an advertisement, I'm not in any way interested in the review, but you do find there, I think, a very useful survey of positions to which several of us have contributed, and a report on the French report Bruno has already referred to. There must be ways by information exchange to avoid that, but certainly just to bring it into this single network mechanism would be, I think, an improvement. Finally, on institutional design, but you will understand probably that from the position of the Belgian authority, we're more interested in the guarantees of resourcing and funding than in the design as such. You know, if you are totally independent to do almost nothing, that is not helping effective enforcement. Resources are essential, and I'm very grateful there for the support of the European Commission, also in the framework of the European semester. That is language governments understand. That is very useful. And what then that funding should be, that's, I'm sure, very difficult to decide, but insisting on adequacy is already a big improvement over the previous situations. And of course, I am grateful to Bruno for his disinterested support in this respect. Disinterest. Well, you don't need a rule. I understand that very few authorities are in this state of happiness. But thank you, because we are all jointly interested in the sense that we all need effective enforcement by all of us. And I again thank the Italian authority for giving the opportunity to create a platform on insisting on how important we think your support is and how important it is to us to hear what you expect from us. Thank you.